They say a mother always knows. We feel it in our bones, don't we? That sharp, twisting pinch in the gut that tells you something isn't right, even when the rest of the world is smiling and clapping. I felt that pinch the moment I stepped into the ballroom. My name is Fatima Hendricks. I am 67 years old, and I have seen enough of life to know the difference between nervous jitters and a bad omen. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My son, Ruben, was getting married. We were in San Francisco, at one of those venues that cost more for a single evening than my parents made in a lifetime. The building was perched right on the edge of the water, overlooking the bay. The view was spectacular, I have to admit. The fog was rolling in over the Golden Gate Bridge, white and heavy, just like the satin ribbons tied to every chair. But the air felt cold, too cold for a wedding. The room was already buzzing. You know the type of crowd. High society. Men in tuxedos that fit too perfectly, women dripping in diamonds that caught the light every time they turned their heads to gossip. I stood by the entrance, smoothing down my dress. I felt small, not because I was ashamed of who I was, but because this world, this fast, shiny, expensive world, was never really mine. It was Ruben's world now. Ruben, my beautiful boy. I looked over at him, near the altar. He was fixing his cufflinks, laughing at something his best man said. He looked so handsome, so successful. He made his millions in tech before he turned 35, and I was proud of him. Of course, I was proud. I raised him on my own, scraping by, teaching him that character mattered more than cash. But standing there, watching him in that grand ballroom, I wondered if he remembered those lessons, because he was about to marry a stranger. Her name was Nancy. That was about all I knew. Ruben had met her only 3 months ago. 3 months. You don't marry someone after 3 months, not when you have the kind of assets Ruben has. You get to know them. You meet their family. You see how they handle a bad day, a flat tire, a burnt dinner. Ruben had done none of that. He called me up one Tuesday and said, "Mom, I'm in love. She's the one. And we aren't waiting." I tried to reason with him back then. I told him to slow down, but he cut me off. "She's special, Mom. She needs me. She's different." Different was one word for it. Nancy was mute. Ruben told me she had been through something terrible, a trauma so deep it stole her voice. My heart broke for her when he first told me, "I am a mother. After all, I hate to think of anyone in pain." But I also had a nagging voice in my head, the protective mother bear that never sleeps. Was it true? Or was it convenient? How do you truly know a person if they never speak to you? I took a deep breath and walked toward the front row. I had to be supportive. That is the job, isn't it? We raise our sons to be men, to make their own choices, and then we have to stand back and let them live with those choices, even if we want to scream. I plastered a smile on my face. I nodded at the guests who looked through me. I sat down in the velvet chair reserved for the mother of the groom and folded my hands tight in my lap so they wouldn't shake. The music changed. The chatter died down. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. It was time. I turned in my seat, expecting to see a blushing bride, nervous and excited. I wanted to be wrong. I prayed to God right there in that seat. "Lord, let me be a suspicious old woman. Let me be wrong. Let this girl be the love of his life." Nancy stepped into the aisle. She was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. She wore a dress that looked like spun sugar, expensive and elegant. Her hair was pulled back, showing off a long, graceful neck. But as she started walking down the aisle, the air in the room shifted. It wasn't the warm, tearful joy you usually feel. It was heavy, quiet. She walked slowly, too slowly. As she passed the rows of guests, she didn't look at anyone. She didn't smile at her friends. Did she even have friends here? I realized I didn't know a single person on the bride's side of the aisle. It was empty, filled in with some of Reuben's business partners to make it look even. That pinch in my gut turned into a twist. She got closer to the front. Reuben stepped down to meet her, his face glowing with love. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world. He reached out his hand. Nancy stopped, just for a second. She was standing right next to my chair. I couldn't help myself. I stood up just a little, wanting to catch her. Wanting to welcome her, wanting to see something human in this perfect doll of a woman. Nancy, I whispered. She turned her head. Our eyes met for the first time that day. I froze. I expected to see nerves. I expected to see shyness. I expected to see love for my son. But I saw nothing. Her eyes were like glass. Distant. Empty. It was as if she wasn't even in the room. It was the look of someone who is miles away or someone who is sleepwalking. There was no light in them. No excitement. Just a flat, cold stare that went right through me. It sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the San Francisco fog. It lasted only a second. Reuben took her hand, and she snapped her head back toward him. The connection broke. I sank back into my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. What was that? Was that trauma? Was that fear? Or was it something else? My mind started racing, replaying every conversation I'd had with Reuben. She's quiet, Mom. She's gentle. She listens. Does she listen, Reuben? Or is she just hiding? The officiant began to speak. We are gathered here today. I looked at my son's back. He was standing tall, his shoulders squared, ready to protect this woman, ready to give her his name and his fortune. He squeezed her hand. She didn't squeeze back. I saw her hand go limp in his, like she was just tolerating his touch. A wave of panic rose in my throat. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say, stop. Look at her, Reuben. Really look at her. But I didn't. I couldn't. I am his mother, not his jailer. I had to trust him. I had to trust that he knew something I didn't. I forced that smile back onto my face. I sat up straight. I watched as my son pledged his life to a woman who looked like she was attending a funeral rather than a wedding. The ceremony went on. Vows were spoken, by Reuben at least. Nancy simply nodded at the right times. The silence when her turn came was deafening. The officiant asked, "Do you take this man?" And she just nodded. No whisper. No mouthing the words. Just a nod. It felt wrong. It all felt wrong. As they were pronounced husband and wife, and the applause broke out, polite, restrained applause, I clapped too. I clapped until my hands stung. But as they turned to walk back up the aisle, facing us now as a married couple, I looked at Nancy again. She wasn't looking at Reuben. She wasn't looking at the guests. She was scanning the room, her eyes darting left and right, sharp and alert now. The glazed look was gone, replaced by something else. Calculation? Fear? I didn't know. But as I watched my son lead his silent wife out of the ballroom, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The wedding was done, but the story, the real story of who Nancy was just beginning. And I had a terrible feeling that I was the only one paying attention. I grabbed my purse and stood up. I needed to get to the reception. I needed to get closer to her. I needed to know why a woman on her wedding day looked at her mother-in-law with eyes that were dead cold. I didn't know it then, but that silence was the loudest warning I would ever get. And I was about to find out exactly what it was hiding. The reception was held in the grand ballroom, a cavernous space filled with crystal chandeliers and tables draped in heavy white linens. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. It was a party for the rich and famous, the kind of event where the noise level rises with every popped cork of champagne. But amidst all that laughter and clinking glass, there was a pocket of silence that moved wherever my new daughter-in-law went. I watched them from my table near the dance floor. Reuben was guiding Nancy through the crowd, his hand firmly planted on the small of her back. They were doing the rounds, that obligatory march where the bride and groom have to greet every distant cousin and business partner. I've been to dozens of weddings, and usually the bride is the center of energy. She laughs, she hugs, she compliments Aunt Martha's hat. Not Nancy. Nancy was like a beautiful, moving statue. She smiled, yes, but it was a tight practice thing. When people spoke to her, offering their congratulations, she would simply nod or offer a small, polite bow. She didn't open her mouth. Not once. I saw my cousin, Brenda, lean in to say something to Nancy. Brenda is a loud woman, the kind who expects an answer when she talks. I saw Brenda's eyebrows shoot up when Nancy just stared back at her pleasantly. Brenda looked at Reuben, confused. Reuben stepped in immediately. I saw his lips moving, explaining, gesturing. He was doing the talking for both of them. I couldn't sit there anymore. I needed to hear what he was saying. I smoothed my dress and made my way over, timing it so I arrived just as they were finishing with one of Reuben's college friends. Mom, Reuben said, spotting me. He looked tired. The wedding was only an hour old, and my son already looked exhausted. Are you having a good time? It's a beautiful party, Reuben, I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. I turned to Nancy. And you look lovely, dear. Truly. Nancy looked at me. There it was again, that flat, unreadable gaze. She dipped her chin in acknowledgement, but there was no warmth. No, thank you, Fatima. No, I'm so happy to be part of the family. Just silence. Nancy is a bit overwhelmed, Reuben said quickly, his voice tight. He pulled her a fraction closer to him. It's a lot of people. I can see that, I said carefully. But surely she can say hello to the guests? People are starting to wonder. Reuben stiffened. Let them wonder. I told you, Mom. Nancy doesn't speak. She's mute. He said the word mute loudly, almost as a challenge. A few heads turned at the nearby tables. I know what you told me. I whispered, not wanting to make a scene. You said it was trauma from her past. It is, Reuben insisted, his eyes darting around defensively. She's a sweet, kind woman, Mom. She prefers not to speak. It's too painful for her, and I don't want anyone pushing her tonight. She's been through enough. Nancy stood there while we discussed her like she was a piece of furniture. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look upset that her husband was snapping at his mother. She just smoothed the fabric of her skirt, her face perfectly blank. I'm not pushing Reuben, I said softly. I just want to know her. How can I know her if she never says a word? You can know her by her actions, Reuben said. She loves me. That's all that matters. He turned away then, guiding Nancy toward the head table, effectively dismissing me. I stood there, feeling cold despite the heat of the room. I went back to my seat, but I couldn't eat. I watched them. I watched how the waiters approached their table. A young man offered Nancy a glass of wine. She didn't answer. She just pointed. When he didn't understand immediately, Reuben barked an order at him. It bothered me. It bothered me deep in my spirit. I thought about my own marriage to Reuben's father. God rest his soul. We didn't have money like this. We didn't have a ballroom or a 5-course meal. But we had words. Oh, we had millions of words. We talked about everything, bills, dreams, what to name the dog, what we wanted for dinner. Even when we fought, we communicated. The silence only came when we were sleeping. How do you build a life on silence? How do you raise children? How do you solve a problem? Reuben seemed to think he was being noble. I could see it in his posture. He was the protector, the knight in shining armor saving the broken, silent bird. But the more I watched, the less Nancy looked like a broken bird. She looked bored. A woman from the tennis club approached their table later in the evening. She was chatty, asking Nancy about the honeymoon. Are you going to Paris? Or maybe Hawaii? Nancy just stared. The woman laughed nervously. Cat got your tongue, honey? Reuben slammed his fork down. It made a loud clatter against the china. The music seemed to stop for a second at our end of the room. She doesn't speak, Reuben snapped. Why can't people just respect that? The woman turned red and hurried away. Reuben looked furious. He was defending her, yes, but he was also isolating them. He was building a wall around the two of them, brick by brick. And Nancy, she didn't reach out to calm him down. She didn't place a hand on his arm to say, "It's okay, honey." She just took a sip of her water, completely unbothered by the scene her silence had caused. That was the moment the unease really settled in my stomach, heavy and hard. Trauma makes people skittish. It makes them shy or nervous or emotional. I've volunteered at shelters. I've seen trauma. Nancy didn't look traumatized. She looked in control. She was controlling the entire room without saying a single syllable. Everyone was walking on eggshells around her. Reuben was acting like her guard dog, and she was sitting in the middle of it all, untouchable. I sipped my coffee, watching my son whisper something into her ear. He looked desperate for a reaction. She gave him a small, thin smile, then looked away, scanning the crowd again. Was she looking for someone, or was she just checking to see if we were all still buying it? I realized then that my son hadn't just married a quiet woman. He had married a mystery, and as his mother, I couldn't just sit back and clap along. I had to figure out what was going on inside that pretty head of hers. Because if she wasn't speaking because she couldn't, that was a tragedy. But if she wasn't speaking because she wouldn't, that was a lie. And I needed to know why she was lying to my son. The wedding cake hadn't even been cut yet, but the knot in my stomach told me the honeymoon was already over. Something was wrong with this silence, and I was going to be the one to break it. By 10 o'clock, the elegance of the wedding had started to wear off, replaced by the loose, loud energy of an open bar. The polite chatter was gone, drowned out by the DJ, who had switched from classical strings to thumping bass that rattled the silverware on the tables. The younger guests were on the dance floor, ties loosened, heels kicked off under the tables. I sat at my table, nursing a glass of iced water. My feet were throbbing in my heels, but I wasn't ready to leave. I couldn't leave. I was watching. Reuben was in the center of a circle of his old college buddies, laughing, a cigar in one hand and a tumbler of scotch in the other. He looked happy, relieved, actually. The ceremony was done. The speeches were over. And now he could just be the rich, successful man everyone admired. But where was his wife? I scanned the room. Nancy wasn't next to him. She wasn't dancing. She wasn't sitting with her new in-laws. I finally spotted her. She had retreated to the very edge of the ballroom, near the French doors that led out to the terrace. She was standing half in the shadows, clutching her small beaded purse like a shield. She looked like a deer that had wandered onto a highway. Eyes wide, muscles tense, ready to bolt at the first sudden movement. I stood up. My back gave a little protest, but I ignored it. I needed to get to her before Reuben swooped in to save her again. I wanted to see who she was when he wasn't there to translate. I walked slowly, weaving through the dancing couples. When I reached her, she didn't notice me at first. She was staring out at the dark water of the bay, her shoulders rising and falling in a fast, shallow rhythm. It's loud, isn't it? I said softly. Nancy jumped. Her head whipped around. And for a split second, I saw genuine panic on her face. When she realized it was just me, just the old mother-in-law, her expression smoothed out instantly. The mask was back in place. She nodded, a small, tight movement. I used to hide in the bathroom at my own parties. I confessed, leaning against the doorframe. I wanted to disarm her. I wanted her to see me as an ally, not an interrogator. Reuben's father, he loved the noise. He loved being the center of attention. But me, I just wanted to sit with a cup of tea and a book. It's exhausting, pretending to be happy for 5 hours straight. I watched her closely. I was fishing. I wanted to see if she would bite, if she would give me a knowing look, a roll of the eyes, anything that said, yes, I hate this. But she didn't. She just stared at me. Her hands were trembling, slightly. Nancy, I said, stepping a little closer. You don't have to perform for me. If you want to step outside for fresh air, we can. Reuben is busy showing off. He won't notice. She looked over at Reuben. He was shouting something over the music, slapping a friend on the back. A shadow passed over her face. It wasn't love. It looked like exhaustion. She opened her purse. My heart sped up. Was she getting a phone? Was she going to type something out? She pulled out a small leather-bound notepad and a silver pen. She clicked the pen. Click, click. A nervous tick. She looked around the room quickly, almost as if she was checking to see if anyone was watching us. Then she pressed the pen to the paper. She wrote fast, furious scratches. It wasn't the slow, careful writing of a calm person. It was jagged. She ripped the page out with a sharp zip sound and handed it to me. I took it. The paper was warm from her hand. I tilted it toward the light coming from the ballroom. The noise is too much. I feel like I'm drowning in all these people. Please don't be mad if I leave early. I looked up at her. Drowning? She nodded, her eyes pleading. She pointed to her chest, then made a motion like she couldn't breathe. I'm not mad, honey, I said. I understand anxiety. Is that what this is? Just anxiety? She hesitated. Then she nodded again, but her eyes didn't match the nod. Her eyes were shifting left and right, scanning the shadows of the terrace. I looked at the note again. The handwriting was strange. It was slanted hard to the right, sharp and spiky. It looked angry. The words said she was overwhelmed by the crowd, but the ink looked like it had been stabbed into the paper. Nancy, I lowered my voice. If there is something else, if you are in trouble. She froze. She took a step back from me, shaking her head vigorously. She pointed at the crowd, then at her head, miming a headache. She was retreating. I had pushed too hard. Okay, I said, raising my hands. Okay, I believe you. I didn't. She gave me one last look. Was it an apology? And then turned and slipped out the glass doors onto the dark terrace. I watched her go, a white ghost disappearing into the fog. I stood there alone, holding that scrap of paper. I looked over at my son again. He was still laughing. He hadn't even noticed his wife was gone. And that's when the sadness hit me. Not for Nancy, but for Reuben. I thought back to when Reuben was a little boy. He was always so sensitive. If I raised my voice, he would cry. If the other boys were mean to him, he wouldn't fight back. He would just shut down. He hated conflict. He hated messy emotions. He wanted everything to be smooth, easy, and quiet. As he grew up and made all that money, he built a world where he could control everything. He bought the perfect house, the perfect car, the perfect suits. And now he had bought the perfect wife. A wife who couldn't talk back. A wife who couldn't yell at him when he worked too late. A wife who couldn't argue about money or kids or where to spend Christmas. A wife who couldn't demand deep, difficult conversations about feelings. I realized with a sinking feeling in my gut that Reuben didn't marry Nancy despite her silence. He married her because of it. He thought he had found the ultimate hack to a happy life. Remove the communication, remove the conflict. But I looked down at the note in my hand. I feel like I'm drowning. Reuben thought silence was peace. But silence isn't peace. Silence is just a lid on a boiling pot. My husband and I, we fought. We yelled until the neighbors probably thought we were crazy. But we also forgave. We talked until 3 a.m. to fix things. We knew each other's darkest thoughts because we spoke them. That is how you grow. That is how you become a partner. Reuben was 35 years old, but emotionally, he was still that little boy covering his ears because he didn't want to hear the noise. He had married a woman he didn't have to truly know. He could project whatever fantasy he wanted onto her silence. He could pretend she was happy, pretend she was fine, because she never said otherwise. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. It felt heavy there. Nancy wasn't just shy. She wasn't just overwhelmed. That note was a cry for help, even if she wouldn't admit it. And my son was walking around blind, thinking he had won the lottery, while his wife was drowning right in front of him. I watched the party wind down. The waiters started clearing the tables. The music slowed. Finally, Reuben went looking for her. I saw him go out to the terrace and bring her back in. He had his arm around her, guiding her like she was an invalid. They walked past me on their way to the exit. "Good night, Mom." Reuben called out, beaming. "Best night of my life." Nancy didn't look at me. She kept her head down, staring at the floor as she walked. "Good night," I said. I waited until the valet brought their car around. I waited until they drove off into the dark San Francisco night. I took the note out of my pocket one last time. I ran my thumb over the jagged ink. Please don't be mad. Why would she think I'd be mad? Why was she so afraid of judgment? I walked to my own car, my feet aching, my heart heavy. I knew I shouldn't interfere. I knew the rule book for mothers-in-law says, keep your mouth shut and wear beige. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the girl in the white dress wasn't a bride. She was a prisoner, and I wasn't sure if the prison was her silence or my son. I started my engine. I resolved right then and there that I would visit them soon. I wouldn't wait for an invitation. I needed to see them in their own home. I needed to see what happened when the music stopped and the guests went home. Because the silence in that house, I had a feeling it was going to be deafening. I waited exactly 1 week. 7 days. That is the polite amount of time a mother-in-law is supposed to wait before intruding on newlyweds, isn't it? Reuben and Nancy had moved into a house in Berkeley. It wasn't what I expected. My son has millions in the bank. He could have bought a mansion in Pacific Heights or a sprawling estate in Marin. Instead, they chose a small, older bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was charming, I suppose, but it felt hidden, tucked away, like a place you go when you don't want to be found. I parked my car out front and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. In the passenger seat sat a lasagna wrapped in foil. It was my excuse, just dropping by with dinner. I would say, I know you two are busy unpacking. It was a lie, of course. I wasn't there to feed them. I was there to inspect. I knew Reuben was at work. He had texted me earlier about a merger meeting that was going to run late. That meant Nancy was alone. I walked up the path, my heart doing that nervous flutter again. The house was silent. The curtains were drawn, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. I rang the bell. A few moments later, the door opened. Nancy stood there. She was wearing oversized sweatpants and one of Reuben's old t-shirts. Her hair was in a messy bun, And she looked young, without the makeup and the expensive wedding dress. She looked like a college student. She looked tired. "Hello, Nancy," I said, holding up the lasagna like a shield. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just thought you might not feel like cooking." She stared at me for a second, then stepped back to let me in. She gave a small, polite nod. The house was filled with boxes. Half-unpacked books were stacked on the floor. The air smelled like cardboard and dust. It was quiet, oppressively quiet. There was no music playing, no TV on, just the sound of my own heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "I can put this in the oven," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the small space. Nancy pointed to the kitchen. She walked over to the kettle and started filling it with water. She was making tea. It was a kind gesture, I suppose, but the silence was stretching out between us like a rubber band ready to snap. I leaned against the counter, watching her back. "How are you settling in?" I asked. She turned and gave me a thumbs up. A thumbs up, like a teenager. "And Reuben?" I pressed. "Is he happy?" She nodded vigorously. I felt a surge of irritation rising in my chest. I couldn't help it. I looked at this woman, this stranger, making tea in my son's kitchen, refusing to utter a single sound, and I felt a fierce, protective anger. Reuben was out there working, building a future, and he was coming home to this, to charades. "Nancy," I said, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. "Look at me." She froze, the kettle still in her hand. She turned slowly. "My son loves you," I said. "He defends you. He tells me you are traumatized, that you can't speak. And I want to believe him. I really do." I took a step closer. "But I am his mother, and I know that marriage is hard enough when you can talk to each other. How are you going to support him if you can't even ask him how his day was? How are you going to raise children? Are you going to be mute with them, too?" It was cruel. I know it was cruel, but I needed a reaction. I needed to see something real. Nancy's eyes welled up. She set the kettle down on the stove with a clatter. She looked down at her hands, trembling. "I'm not trying to be mean." I softened my tone, but I didn't back down. I feel like you are hiding, and Reuben is the one paying the price." She squeezed her eyes shut. She looked like she was in physical pain. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her throat bobbed. I sighed. "I'll just leave the food," I said, turning to grab my purse. "I didn't mean to upset you." I started walking toward the living room. "Stop." The word was soft, barely a whisper, but it stopped me dead in my tracks. I turned around slowly. The kitchen was empty of sound again, and for a second I thought I had imagined it. I thought maybe the house settling had made a noise. Nancy was standing exactly where I left her, gripping the edge of the counter, so hard her knuckles were white. She was looking right at me. "What did you do?" I whispered. She took a shuddering breath. She looked terrified. She looked like a person standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. Then she opened her mouth again. I said, "Stop." Her voice was raspy, like a rusty hinge that hadn't been used in years. But it was clear. It was American. It was the voice of a grown woman, not a child. My purse slipped from my shoulder and hit the floor with a thud. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't move. "You can speak," I said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Nancy let out a sob, a real, audible sound that tore through the room. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, burying her face in her hands. "I can," she cried. "God help me, I can." I stood there, paralyzed. My mind was racing so fast, I felt dizzy. She had lied. She had lied to Reuben. She had lied to the priest. She had lied to everyone. She wasn't mute. She was what? An actress? A con artist? I walked back into the kitchen. I didn't go to comfort her. I stood over her. Why? I demanded. Why would you do this to him? Do you have any idea what you've done? Nancy looked up. Her face was streaked with tears. I never wanted to be mute, she said, her voice gaining a little more strength, though it cracked on the edges. I never wanted to hide behind silence. Then why did you? I asked, my voice shaking. Reuben thinks you are broken. He thinks he is saving you. I am broken, she whispered. You don't understand. Make me understand. I said, right now, before I pick up that phone and call my son. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She looked so small, huddled on the kitchen floor of this strange, quiet house. It was the only way to be safe, she said. After what happened to me, I thought if I stopped speaking, I could stop existing. I could disappear. Who were you hiding from? I asked. Myself, she said. And him. Him? Reuben? No, she shook her head. Not Reuben. She took a deep breath, her chest heaving. But then I met Reuben, and he was so kind. He didn't ask questions. He just accepted the silence. And before I knew it, I was trapped. I wanted to tell him, Fatima, every day. I wanted to tell him. But how do you tell the man you love that your entire identity is a lie? I looked at her, and the anger in my chest began to war with something else. Pity. She sounded genuinely tortured. She wasn't a gloating scammer. She was a terrified woman who had dug herself into a hole so deep she couldn't see the sky anymore. You have to tell him, I said. I can't, she begged, reaching out to grab the hem of my pants. Please, Fatima, if I speak, he'll leave me. He fell in love with the quiet girl. He fell in love with the mystery. If he knows I'm a liar, he'll hate me. I looked down at her hand grasping my pant leg. He might hate you, I said honestly, but he deserves the truth. I know, she whispered, but I'm so afraid. I looked at the clock on the microwave. Reuben would be home in 2 hours. I was standing in the kitchen with a woman who had deceived my son in the worst possible way. I should have been furious. I should have marched out the door. But looking at her, broken and sobbing on the floor, I realized something terrifying. I was the only person in the world who knew her real voice. Get up, I said, offering her my hand. She looked at me, surprised. Get up, Nancy, I said. We have 2 hours before he walks through that door. And you are going to tell me everything. She took my hand. Her grip was strong. I pulled her up. The silence in the house was broken now, shattered, and I had a terrible feeling that putting the pieces back together was going to hurt everyone involved. We sat at the small, round kitchen table. The lasagna I had brought was still on the counter, cold now, forgotten. The tea water had long since boiled away. I watched Nancy's hands. They were wrapped around a mug of cold water, her knuckles white, her fingernails bitten down to the quick. She was shaking, not just a little tremble, but a deep, bone-rattling shiver that comes when you've been holding something heavy for too long and you finally let it drop. Talk, I said. I didn't shout. I felt too drained to shout. Start from the beginning. And Nancy, don't you dare leave anything out. Nancy took a sip of water. When she spoke, her voice was still raspy, unused to the volume of a normal conversation. It wasn't a medical condition, she said, looking down at the table. It was training. Training? I asked, frowning. Like a dog. She flinched. Yes, exactly like a dog. She looked up at me then, and the fear in her eyes was replaced by a dull, aching exhaustion. His name was David. I met him 5 years ago in Chicago. He wasn't like Reuben. He wasn't rich or powerful. He was intense. He told me I was too loud. He told me my laugh was annoying. He told me my opinions were stupid. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I knew men like that. I had seen them at church, seen them at the grocery store. Men who shrink their wives until they are small enough to fit in a pocket. He didn't hit me at first. Nancy continued, her voice gaining a little strength. He just edited me if we went out to dinner, and I ordered for myself. He would ignore me for 3 days. If I interrupted him, he would walk out of the room. Slowly, I learned that the only time he was happy with me, the only time I was good, was when I was quiet. So you just stopped speaking? I asked, trying to understand the leap from an abusive boyfriend to a mute bride. It happened slowly, she said. One day we got into a fight. He was screaming at me, telling me how worthless my words were. And I just shut down. I didn't say a word for a week. And you know what happened? He was nice. He brought me flowers. He told me I was finally learning to be a lady. He loved the silence. He loved that I was just a body, a presence without a voice to challenge him. My God, I whispered. I left him 2 years ago, Nancy said. I ran away in the middle of the night. I came here to California because I didn't know a soul. But the silence, it followed me. I was so afraid, Fatima. I was terrified that if I spoke, if I was loud again, I would attract another David. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could be invisible. I could be safe. I looked at this young woman. I wanted to reach across the table and hug her, but I also wanted to shake her. But you met Reuben, I said sternly. Reuben isn't David. Reuben is gentle. Why keep the lie going with him? Nancy let out a bitter laugh. It was a strange sound coming from the mute girl. I didn't mean to lie to Reuben, she said. Not at first. When we met at that coffee shop, I just didn't speak because I was in the habit of not speaking. I wrote my order on a napkin. Reuben saw it. He asked if I was mute. And I just nodded. You nodded, I repeated flatly. And you built a marriage on a nod. He liked it. Fatima, she said, leaning forward, her eyes intense. That's the part you need to understand. Reuben liked it. He didn't ask why I was mute. He didn't ask for medical records. He didn't ask about my therapy. He just got this look in his eyes, this savior look. He told me I was mysterious. He told me I was peaceful. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. Reuben talks a lot, she said softly. He talks about his business, his money, his plans. He didn't want a partner who would interrupt him. He wanted a listener. And I was the perfect listener. The more I stayed silent, the more he fell in love. But he didn't fall in love with me. He fell in love with the quiet. He fell in love with the idea of a woman who would never argue, never complain, never ask for more than he wanted to give. I sat back in my chair. The truth of her words hit me like a slap in the face. I wanted to defend my son. I wanted to say, no, Reuben is kind, Reuben is deep. But I remembered the wedding. I remembered how he spoke for her. I remembered how he got angry when anyone tried to engage her. I remembered the note she wrote me at the party. I feel like I'm drowning. She wasn't drowning in noise. She was drowning in his projection of her. So you let him believe it. I said, you let him marry a doll. I tried to tell him. She insisted. A dozen times I almost spoke, but every time I got close, I got scared. I thought, if I speak, the magic breaks. If I speak, I become just another woman with opinions and baggage and a past, and he'll leave me. I thought I could do it, Fatima. I thought I could just be the quiet wife forever, but it's only been a week, and I feel like I'm going crazy. I have so much to say to him. I want to tell him about my day. I want to tell him I hate jazz music. I want to tell him I love him out loud. But you can't, I said, because the moment you open your mouth, he's going to know you're a liar. Yes, she whispered. And now you know, too. We sat in silence for a long moment. The sun was starting to go down outside, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. My anger was still there, simmering. She had deceived my son. She had manipulated him, just as she had been manipulated. It was a cycle of lies. But beneath the anger, my heart was breaking for her. To be so afraid of your own voice that you lock it away, that is a prison I couldn't imagine. Does he know about David? I asked. No, she said. He thinks I have no family. He thinks I'm a blank slate. Reuben, I muttered, shaking my head. My foolish, blind boy. I looked at Nancy. You know you have to tell him. Tonight. Panic flared in her eyes again. I can't. Not yet. Give me more time. No, I said, slamming my hand on the table. It made her jump. No more time. You have been married for 7 days. Every day you wait, the lie gets bigger. If you wait a month, it's unforgivable. If you tell him now, maybe, just maybe, there is a chance. He'll throw me out, she said, her voice trembling. He might, I said honestly. He has a right to be angry. You tricked him. I love him, she cried. I really do love him. Then respect him enough to give him the truth, I said. Love isn't just gazing at each other in silence, Nancy. Love is the hard stuff. Love is the ugly stuff. If he can't love the woman who speaks, then he doesn't love you. I checked my watch. He's going to be home in 45 minutes. I stood up. I felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of the entire house on my shoulders. What are you going to do? Nancy asked, standing up too. She looked terrified of me now. I'm going to sit in the living room, I said, and I am going to wait for my son. And when he walks through that door, you are going to say, "Hello, Reuben," out loud. And if I can't, she whispered, I looked her dead in the eye, then I will do it for you. And trust me, Nancy, you want this to come from you, not his mother. She nodded, swallowing hard. She looked sick. I walked into the living room and sat on the sofa. I didn't turn on the lamp. I sat in the twilight, listening to the clock ticking on the wall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the sound of a bomb counting down. My son was coming home to a wife he didn't know, and I was about to watch his perfect, quiet world shatter into a million loud pieces. The headlights swept across the living room wall like a searchlight. I saw the flash of white light hit the family photos on the mantel, then disappear as the car pulled into the driveway. The engine cut off. The heavy silence of the house returned, but now it was charged with electricity. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm, thick, heavy, and dangerous. I looked at Nancy. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles looked like white marbles. She was staring at the front door, as if it were the mouth of a monster. Breathe, I whispered. She didn't look at me. She just nodded, a tiny, jerky motion. We heard the key slide into the lock. The click of the deadbolt sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. The door swung open, and there he was, Reuben, my son. He looked tired but happy. His tie was loosened, his jacket thrown over one arm. He was smiling before he even fully stepped inside. He was expecting his sanctuary. He was expecting his quiet, peaceful home where no one demanded anything from him. "Honey, I'm home," he called out, kicking off his shoes. "Sorry I'm late." The merger talk went on forever. "You wouldn't believe what?" He stopped. He saw me sitting in the armchair in the shadows. He saw Nancy sitting rigid on the sofa, her eyes red and swollen. The smile dropped from his face instantly, replaced by a look of confusion and sudden worry. "Mom," he asked, stepping fully into the room. He looked between us. "Is everything okay? Did something happen?" He dropped his briefcase on the floor. "Is it Dad's grave? Is it your health?" "Sit down, Reuben," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he might hear it. I don't want to sit down, he said, his voice rising. He walked over to Nancy and put a hand on her shoulder. She flinched. He pulled his hand back, as if he had been burned. Nancy? Honey? Why are you crying? Did Mom say something to you? He turned on me, his eyes flashing with that protective anger I had seen at the wedding. Mom, what did you do? I told you she's sensitive. You can't just come over here and upset her. I didn't upset her, Reuben, I said calmly. I found her. Found her? He frowned. She was right here. What are you talking about? I looked at Nancy. This was it. The moment of truth. Tell him, I said. Reuben looked at me like I was crazy. Tell me what? Mom, she can't talk. Stop pressuring her. Nancy stood up. Her legs were shaking so bad. I thought she might fall, but she stood. She looked at her husband, the man who had given her a home, a ring, and a life, all based on a lie. She opened her mouth. Her lips trembled. I'm sorry, Reuben, she said. The sound of her voice was soft, raspy, and terrified, but in that quiet room, it sounded like a scream. Reuben froze. He literally froze. He stood there with his mouth half open, his eyes wide, staring at her. He looked like someone who had just seen a ghost. He blinked once, twice, trying to process what his ears had just heard. What? He whispered. The word came out as a breath, barely audible. I can speak, Nancy said, tears spilling over her cheeks again. I've always been able to speak. Reuben took a step back. He looked at her, then he looked at me, then back at her. He looked at the ceiling, at the floor, as if searching for a hidden camera. He let out a short, sharp laugh, a laugh of pure disbelief. Is this a joke? He asked, his voice cracking. Is this some kind of sick prank? No, Nancy sobbed. It's the truth. Reuben's face changed. The shock melted away, and underneath it was something much harder to look at. Betrayal. Pure, raw betrayal. His face flushed red. The veins in his neck stood out. You talked, he stammered. You talked the whole time? At the wedding? When we met? When I proposed? Nancy nodded, unable to speak, through her crying. I sat there. Reuben shouted, his voice booming off the walls. I sat there for hours telling you my secrets. I told you about my childhood. I told you my fears. And you just sat there and nodded. You let me believe you were broken. I was broken. Nancy cried out. I am broken, Reuben. You're a liar, he screamed. He turned to me, pointing a shaking finger. And you knew? How long have you known? Did you both plan this? Is this about the money? Did you think it would be funny to trick the rich guy? Reuben, stop it, I said, standing up. I used my mother voice, the one that used to make him clean his room when he was 10. I found out today, 2 hours ago, and I made her stay here to tell you because you deserve the truth. The truth. Reuben laughed again, a bitter, ugly sound. I don't know what the truth is anymore. I married a mute woman. That was my wife. Who is this? Who is this stranger in my living room yelling at me? He paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. He looked like an animal trapped in a cage. Why? He demanded, spinning around to face Nancy. Just tell me why. Was it a game? Did you enjoy watching me make a fool of myself, interpreting your hand signals like an idiot? No. Nancy stepped toward him, reaching out a hand, but he backed away. It wasn't a game. It was survival. Survival. Reuben scoffed. You live in $1 million house in Berkeley. You aren't surviving. Nancy, you're living the dream. I was hiding, she shouted back. Her voice was getting stronger now, fueled by the adrenaline of the fight. I was in an abusive relationship before you, Reuben, a man who controlled every word I said, a man who punished me, for speaking. I stopped talking to stay safe. And when I met you, I didn't know how to start again. Reuben stopped pacing. He looked at her, really looked at her. He was listening, but the hurt in his eyes was so deep it made my chest ache. You didn't trust me, he said softly. That hurt more than the yelling. I gave you everything. I gave you my heart. And you didn't trust me enough to say hello to... I was afraid I'd lose you, Nancy whispered. I thought you fell in love with the quiet. I thought if I spoke, if I had opinions, if I was messy and loud and real, you wouldn't want me anymore. Reuben looked at me. He looked lost. He was a powerful man, a CEO, a leader. But right now, he was just a little boy looking at his mother, asking for an explanation for a world that didn't make sense. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. Did you know she thought this? Did you know she thought I was shallow? She didn't think you were shallow, Reuben, I said gently. She thought you were safe. And she was terrified of ruining that safety. I walked over to him and placed my hand on his arm. He was trembling. But she was wrong to lie, I added firmly. And you have a right to be angry. You have a right to feel betrayed. But you also need to ask yourself something. Son. He looked down at me. What? Did you ever ask? I said, did you ever really try to dig deep? Or were you just happy that she was easy? Reuben flinched. I saw the truth of it hit him. He had enjoyed the silence. He had enjoyed the lack of conflict. He had been complicit in the lie because it was convenient for him. He looked back at Nancy. She was wiping her eyes, waiting for his verdict. She looked exhausted, stripped bare. I don't know who you are, Reuben said to her. His voice was flat. I look at you and I see my wife, but I hear a stranger. I'm still me, Nancy pleaded. I'm the same woman who holds your hand when you have a nightmare. I'm the same woman who makes your coffee. I have a voice now. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Reuben asked, why did you wait until my mother forced you? Why did you let me marry a lie? The room went quiet. This was the question that mattered. Nancy took a deep breath. She looked him dead in the eye. Because I was selfish, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Because for the first time in my life, I was loved. And I just knew that the moment I opened my mouth, the fairy tale would end. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be your wife more than I wanted to be honest. She took a step closer to him. But I'm telling you now, she said. I'm telling you now because I can't love you properly with my mouth shut. And if you want me to leave, if you want a divorce, tell me. Use your voice, Reuben. Tell me to go. Reuben stared at her. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The air was so tight it felt like it was going to snap. He looked at the door. He looked at his wife. Then he looked at me. Mom, he said quietly, can you please leave? My heart sank. I wanted to stay. I wanted to fix it. But I knew I couldn't. This wasn't my fight anymore. Okay, I said. I picked up my purse. I walked to the door. I looked back one last time. Reuben was standing 5 feet apart from Nancy. They were looking at each other across a divide that seemed miles wide. Call me, I said. I walked out into the cool night air and closed the door behind me. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening. I expected shouting. I expected the sound of breaking glass. But there was only silence. And somehow that was more terrifying than any scream. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. I sat in my kitchen in my bathrobe, staring at the landline phone on the wall, willing it to ring. I drank 3 cups of herbal tea, but my stomach was tied in such tight knots that nothing helped. Every time a car drove past my house, I jumped, expecting to see Reuben's headlights in my driveway. I expected him to come storming in with his suitcases, telling me it was over. Or worse, I expected a call from Nancy, crying, telling me he had thrown her out on the street. But the phone stayed silent. The night dragged on, heavy and slow, until the gray light of dawn finally crept through the blinds. At 7:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. I didn't run. I walked slowly to the door, steeling myself for whatever wreckage was waiting on the other side. It was Reuben. He looked terrible. My handsome, put-together son, who usually wouldn't be caught dead without a fresh shave and a press shirt, looked like he had aged 10 years in one night. He was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, wrinkled and disheveled. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. He didn't have a bag with him. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside. He walked past me into the kitchen, like a zombie. He pulled out a chair at the table, the same table where I had fed him oatmeal before school 30 years ago, and collapsed into it. He put his head in his hands. I didn't ask questions yet. I just went to the coffee pot, poured a strong cup, black, the way he likes it, and set it down in front of him. I sat opposite him and waited. He took a sip, the steam rising up to hide his face for a moment. "She slept in the guest room," he said. His voice was rough. "And you?" I asked. "I sat on the couch," he said. "I just stared at the wall, Mom." I replayed every moment of the last 3 months in my head. Every date, every smile, every time I squeezed her hand and thought we were sharing a special, silent moment. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with tears. "I feel like such a fool. How did I not know? How could I live with someone and not know they could speak? Because you saw what you wanted to see," I said gently. It was the hard truth, but he needed to hear it. "You wanted peace, Reuben. You wanted a woman who didn't demand anything from you. And she gave you exactly that." "I feel tricked," he whispered. "I feel like the marriage is a sham." I looked at our wedding photos on the mantel this morning. They felt fake, like actors on a set. "The deception is real," I agreed. "And the hurt is real. But the woman is real too, Reuben. Nancy isn't an actor. She's a survivor." Reuben rubbed his temples. "She told me more last night. After you left. She told me about the man before me, David. She told me about him too," I said. "It sounds like a nightmare," Reuben said, shaking his head. "He broke her down until she was nothing. She said she stopped speaking because it was the only way to stop the fighting. She said silence felt like a shield." He looked out the window at my garden, watching the birds pecking at the feeder. "I'm angry, Mom," he admitted. "I'm so angry that she lied to me. But when she told me about him, about how scared she was, I felt sick. I wanted to protect her. Is that crazy? To want to protect the person who just betrayed you?" "That's not crazy," I said, reaching across the table to cover his hand with mine. "That's love. Love isn't a switch you can just flip off because you're mad. It's messy. I don't know what to do," he said, his voice cracking. "Do I divorce her? Do I annul it? Everyone is going to ask questions. If she starts talking suddenly, what do I tell people? That my wife was miraculously healed. I'll look like an idiot." "Forget the people," I said sharply. "This isn't about the country club or your business partners. This is about your life. Can you live with her truth? That is the only question." Reuben sighed, a long, shuddering breath. "I don't know." "Reuben," I said, leaning in, "you have 2 choices. You can walk away. No one would blame you. She lied to you on a fundamental level. You can pack your bags, file the papers, and find a nice, normal woman who talks too much." He let out a dry chuckle. "Or," I continued, "you can stay. But if you stay, you have to understand something. You aren't married to the fantasy anymore. The mute girl is gone. You are married to a woman with a past, with scars, and with a voice. And she is going to have things to say that you might not want to hear. She is going to have opinions. She is going to have baggage. I realized something last night. Reuben said quietly. I realized that I don't actually know her. I know her favorite color. I know she likes her coffee sweet, but I don't know her stories. I don't know her jokes. I don't know who she is when she's angry or excited. That's terrifying, I said, but it's also an opportunity. Most people take years to peel back the layers. You got yours ripped off all at once like a Band-Aid. He took another long sip of coffee. I told her I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I kept my face neutral. What did she say? She cried. Reuben said she tried to say thank you, but her voice, it's weak, Mom. It sounds rusty. It hurts to hear it. It reminds me of how long she was hiding. So what is the plan? I asked. I told her we need to start over. Reuben said, I told her I'm moving into the guest room for a while. I told her that every night at dinner, she has to tell me one thing about herself, one real thing, and she has to say it out loud. That sounds like a good start. I said, I told her I can't promise that I'll forgive her. He added, his face hardening slightly. I can't promise that we'll make it to our first anniversary. The trust is gone, Mom. It's completely shattered. I look at her, and I wonder, what else are you lying about? That will take time, I said. Trust is like a vase, Reuben. Once it's broken, you can glue it back together, but you will always see the cracks. You just have to decide if the vase is still beautiful enough to keep on the shelf. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked a little steadier than when he walked in. The coffee and the confession seemed to have grounded him. I have to go to work, he said. I have to pretend everything is normal. Reuben, I said, standing up to walk him to the door. Be patient with her and with yourself. You are mourning the wife you thought you had, but give the real Nancy a chance. She fought hard to find her voice. Maybe she has something worth saying. He hugged me then, a tight, desperate hug like he used to give me when he was a boy and had scraped his knee. Thanks, Mom, he whispered, and thanks for making her tell me. I think I would have gone my whole life without knowing, and that would have been worse. Go, I said, patting his back. Go home. I watched him drive away. The morning sun was fully up now, burning off the fog. I went back into the kitchen and washed his mug. As I scrubbed the coffee stain, I thought about my son's marriage. It was fragile. It was damaged. Most people would bet against it, but I thought about Nancy's face when she finally spoke. I thought about the desperation in her eyes. She had risked everything to tell the truth. Reuben was right. The trust was shattered. But sometimes things have to fall apart before they can be put back together the right way. He was sleeping in the guest room tonight, but at least they were in the same house. At least the silence was gone. Now, they just had to learn how to talk to each other. And I had a feeling that was going to be harder than any vow they took at the altar. It has been 6 weeks since the truth came out in that quiet living room. 6 weeks since the silence was broken, and the real noise of marriage began. I was invited over for Sunday dinner. It was the first time I had been back to the bungalow since the confrontation. When I pulled up to the curb, I noticed something different immediately. The curtains were open. Light was spilling out onto the front lawn. It seemed like a small thing, but after months of secrecy and hiding, it felt like a declaration. I knocked on the door. Coming. It was Nancy's voice. I still wasn't used to it. Hearing her shout from the kitchen, clear and loud, sent a strange jolt through my system. It was like hearing a dog speak or a statue sing. It felt miraculous and unnatural all at the same time. The door opened. Nancy stood there, wearing an apron over jeans and a sweater. She looked different. The haunted deer-in-headlights look was gone. In its place was a nervous energy, a flutter of movement. She looked like a woman who was learning how to walk again after breaking both legs. "Hi, Fatima," she said. She didn't hug me. We weren't there yet. "Come in. Reuben is in the backyard, checking the grill." "Thank you," I said. I followed her into the kitchen. It was messy. There were vegetable peelings on the counter and a pot boiling on the stove. It looked lived in. It looked like a home, not a stage set. "I'm making stew," Nancy said, stirring the pot. She kept glancing at me, then away. "Reuben told me he hates fancy food. He said he grew up on stews and casseroles. I didn't know that. I thought he only ate steak and lobster. He's a simple boy at heart," I said, sitting at the table. "He just wears expensive suits." Nancy laughed. It was a real laugh, a little raspy, a little clumsy, but real. "I'm learning that," she said. "I'm learning a lot of things." The back door slid open, and Reuben walked in. He smelled like charcoal and autumn air. He looked at Nancy, then at me. There was a tension there, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't gone away. The vase was glued back together, but the cracks were visible. "Hey, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. He walked over to Nancy. He didn't touch her, but he stood close. "Fire is ready." "Great," Nancy said. "Can you take the peppers out?" "I thought you didn't like grilled peppers," Reuben asked, frowning. "No," Nancy corrected him. "I said David didn't like grilled peppers. I love them." The name hung in the air for a second. David, the ghost of her past. The reason for the silence. Reuben paused. A month ago, he would have been confused. Now he just nodded. "Right. Sorry. I'm still keeping track of which memories are yours and which ones were forced on you." "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm still figuring it out too." We sat down to eat. It was the strangest dinner of my life. For months, our meals had been dominated by Reuben's monologues. He would talk, and we would nod. Now, Reuben was quiet. He was eating slowly, watching his wife. He was listening. "I applied for a job today," Nancy announced suddenly, breaking the silence. Reuben looked up, his spoon hovering halfway to his mouth. "You did? Where?" "The library," she said. "In the children's section. Reading stories." Reuben blinked. "Reading stories? Out loud?" "Yes," Nancy said, her chin lifting slightly. "A challenge. I need to use my voice, Reuben. I need to practice. And children, they don't judge if you stumble. They just want to hear the end of the story." Reuben put his spoon down. I watched him carefully. The old Reuben, the one who wanted a trophy wife to sit quietly at galas, might have hated this. He might have said, "You don't need to work. I have millions." But this Reuben looked at his wife, really looked at her. "That sounds brave," he said. Nancy smiled. It wasn't the polite, fake smile from the wedding. It was a shy, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I am brave," she said. "I just forgot for a while." I sat there, chewing my stew, feeling like an intruder in a very private moment. They were falling in love. Not the fairy tale love they had at the start, which was built on smoke and mirrors. This was the gritty, awkward, hard work of falling in love with a real person. Nancy wasn't the perfect, mysterious angel anymore. She was opinionated. She was recovering from trauma. She was messy. And Reuben wasn't the knight in shining armor. He was a man who had been hurt, a man who was learning to let go of control. Later, while Nancy was clearing the table, Reuben walked me to my car. "How is it really going?" I asked him in the driveway. "Don't give me the happy version. Give me the truth." Reuben sighed, leaning against my car door. "It's hard, Mom. Some days I look at her and I still feel angry. I remember the wedding, the lies, the way she let me look like a fool. I get so mad I want to sleep in a hotel." "But you don't," I said. "No," he shook his head. "Because then she'll say something funny or smart or sad. and I realize I find her interesting. She's more interesting now than she was when she was silent. She's a person now, I said. Yeah, Reuben looked back at the house, where Nancy's silhouette was moving in the kitchen window. We're in therapy. Dr. Evans says we have to rebuild the foundation because we built the house on sand. It might fall down, Mom. I can't promise you it won't. I know, I said, but at least you're building it together this time. I drove home slowly that night. The fog was rolling in off the bay, thick and white, covering the city. I thought about my own marriage. I thought about the secrets we keep, the lies we tell to keep the peace, the parts of ourselves we hide to be loved. Nancy took it to an extreme. Yes, but don't we all do it a little bit? Don't we all mute parts of ourselves to fit into someone else's life? Nancy was lucky. She found a voice before it was too late. And Reuben was lucky too, even if he didn't feel like it yet. He was getting a second chance to marry his wife. I don't know if they will make it. The road ahead is long. Trust is a fragile thing, easily broken and hard to fix. But as I turned into my driveway, I remembered the sound of Nancy's laugh in the kitchen. It was raspy. It was imperfect, but it was loud. And in a house that had been silent for so long, a little noise was a beautiful thing. I parked the car and turned off the engine. The silence of my own empty house waited for me. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel worried about my son. He wasn't safe anymore. He wasn't in a quiet, controlled bubble. He was in the thick of it. He was living a real, messy, loud life. And that is all a mother can really hope for. The truth had come out. The silence was over. And whatever happened next, well, at least they would be talking about it. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation by clicking the link in the description. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen, so you can choose what to watch.